Hello again, welcome back. Moving on to our next talk. So, Rachael Reeves is the digital design lead at Te Herenga Haiora. She believes in blending different methodologies to redefine the development of systems, people, and culture. During her talk, she will share the journey of how the government joined forces with a startup to reimagine the way we build and engage users with mental well-being products. It's a story about balancing the complexities of government with the need to rethink the way we design health products. Awesome. Please welcome Rachael.
Hello, sorry about that. Hi everyone, and thank you so much for having me. So I'm Rachael, I'm actually formerly the design lead at Te Herenga Haiora. Currently I'm Chief Chaos Wrangler at 5 New Zealand, and on Monday I will be joining Dovetail. So hello everyone I worked with on this project, everyone I work with now, and everyone I will work with on Monday. So today I'm going to zip through a short overview of the things we changed in our design processes and ways of thinking to develop and launch the New Zealand government's first suite of micro-learning tools to improve general mental well-being. And what makes me tick as a human is human behaviour and developing tools that put the power in the hands of the user. This is why learning design is such a valuable discipline in product development, and I hope to share some of this with you today. So Small Steps is a suite of 12 micro learning tools that aim to help promote general mental well-being. These tools can be used by anyone and are made for all New Zealanders with a focus on resonating with Māori and Pacific peoples. The tools in this suite have been designed and developed with the input of so many. They have been informed with cultural lenses, academic lenses, psychological lenses, and so they are safe for public consumption and have been reviewed clinically as well. So if you want to check out the site, there is the QR code there too. So how did this all begin? It all started with Andy Ellis. Hi, Andy. I know you're on here. Andy was the digital manager at Te Herenga Haiora. He was tasked with decommissioning a legacy product and replacing it with a modern solution. But he was faced with a short timeline, limited budget, and a team already at full capacity. He approached this challenge with the desire to not reinvent the wheel and instead to seek a partnership that would benefit New Zealanders. He wanted to partner with organisations in New Zealand rather than develop government products in isolation. This way, it would reduce costs to the taxpayer, increase speed to market, and support others in this important mahi. Clearhead was chosen as the partner after Te Herenga Haiora completed an analysis of all New Zealand-made digital mental health tools from a technical and academic point of view. So Clearhead was chosen because their target audiences and design methods aligned with Te Herenga Haiora, their tech stack aligned, and their security and data sovereignty processes aligned, and we would be able to do zero-rated data on the site, which is super important for digital inclusion when we look at equity. So once Clearhead were on board, Ara was added to the dream team. They create amazing data-informed strategies for their digital and marketing campaigns, which would enable the tools to reach the target audience. And finally, Ezra Whitaker, an incredibly talented and caring illustrator who brought abstract concepts to life using feedback from illustration focus groups to better the tools. His attention to detail and wide portrayal of all types of New Zealanders helps create a distinct feeling for the product. And finally, myself, so I was the design lead, also the designer, bit of project manager, pretty much a lot of just different hats to get it done in time. This product kicked off on my second day at Te Herenga Haiora, and it took 12 weeks to launch the first 6 tools. So that really shows you that speed to market with the partnership. There are so many people else to name who were pulled in for many favours, little bits of work and getting stuck into this mahi. So here's to the dream team. So here we are with 12 weeks and 4 major challenges ahead of us. So what I'm going to do with our short time together is talk about some of the key things we did to meet these challenges. If you would like to hear more detail, please pop over to the social lounge and I can dig deeper and share frameworks, methodologies, and more detail-orientated stuff. Mental wellbeing in products is still a very new space, so I'd love to hear what you think of what we've done, if you would approach it different, or how you would improve on what we have done, or if you hate what we've done, or think what we've done is wrong, or anything like that. Please do jump in the chat and share your opinions or your thoughts and being curious. This is only the beginning of the journey to help New Zealand access mental wellbeing support digitally and help reduce some of the pressure on the face-to-face services. So mental health and wellbeing sits in the wicked problem space because there is no one way to solve it, and our knowledge of solving it in a digital space is still very limited. We have yet to truly understand and see the impacts of the smartphone era, or how developing mental wellbeing tools using the skills we have learned from this era is the right solution or not. This puts product visions and creation in a difficult to do space. So we approach small steps using the concept of putama, which represents the process of scaffolding or stepping up, as learners are provided with a framework and support to enable them to acquire new skills and knowledge and to consolidate those before attempting the next challenge. This approach enabled us to decouple the larger problems from the larger problems, because it's pretty big out there, and focus on individual behaviours through the staggered launching of tools and ethos of the platform. So much so that Small Steps like the name itself, is the action of the putama, and the logo is symbolic of its pattern. With this approach, we had to be comfortable in the uncomfortable. And the book, Designing With in Public Organisations, is an amazing insight into how to go about facing wicked problems in the public space. If you're interested in reading more, strongly recommend that book. So with wicked problems, you'll also have a wicked amount of stakeholders. I mean a lovely, enjoyable amount of stakeholders, right? So with high-risk products, it's important to get as many lenses across products as possible, but the product team also needs to manage this closely. Mental wellbeing is extremely personal to almost everyone in New Zealand, as 1 in 5 New Zealanders experience mental distress at some point in their life. This makes it difficult to look at objectively or to dig deep into user focus groups or surveys, as it's high risk and dangerous topic to some, and a emotively driven topic to others. So be warned, you can't please everyone, and it can be tough to keep product visions aligned when we are talking about some serious consequences for people. The second challenge was all about charged emotion and humans' experience when experiencing mental distress. I will share the book name with you all in the chat after, guys. Sorry. The second challenge was all about the charged emotions. So before the digital world, when a person decided they wanted help with their mental well-being, they made an active choice and physically travelled to a service provider, where they take you into a room, make you feel safe and secure, and look after you through the service. And that service provider can watch for verbal and behavioural cues to quickly adapt their approach to suit the person. There's also laws and regulations protecting that person as well in that safe space. So where we go to translate these types of experiences, when we go to do it in a digital environment, there is a requirement for us to create the same psychological safety that a service provider offers their client, but we can't see any verbal or behavioural cues. If this safe space can't be created or guaranteed, then a self-service digital product is not the right fit for the service you are wanting to digitalise. So what does this mean? When we think about the designing of products for people experiencing mental distress, we first want to think about where are they accessing this digital product. The easiest way to look at this is to simply note all the places and spaces you use your phone and ask, if I did this upset in this space right now, how would I feel? It's a pretty good self-check to start with. The next thing is, where have they just come from? Because someone clicking on an advert they scroll past on Instagram has a very different intent, and therefore their state will be very different from someone who has Googled or found a link on the mental health website, for example. So I find it handy to define people by a state, whether it's active or passive when they're entering into a product, so that you can kind of think through whether you need to turn that person from passive to active and what that looks like. So for instance, yeah, going from Instagram onto a site, you're in a pretty passive browsing kind of way, whereas that help-seeking kind of energy of searching for something on Google and then going to that is more in that active state. And so finally, the most important piece, which as humans we struggle with, and I really struggle with this conference speech, is don't jam too much in. As humans, we have 3 zones we could be in when we are dealing with learning experiences. Your comfort zone, which is where you're happy and safe, which is where I'd like to be right now. Your learning zone, where you are engaged and learning, and your panic zone, which is definitely where I am right now. So that's your 3 kind of zones for when you're learning. When we are developing learning tools, we want to aim them at that learning zone. But everyone's bandwidth for these zones is different. So to track the intensity of your content or learning, a good acid test is breadth and depth versus time. So in other words, the shorter the experience, the shallower the content. That's also true when you have the element of the behavior cues. If you require behavioral cues and you can't get those, that's also going to shallow your content up. All right, so we also want to take into account the important factors that make the person who they are. Mental well-being impacts the mana of a person, and people can feel like they have lost mana when they become mentally distressed. This can have a lot of run-on effects, which I, as not a healthcare professional, will not attempt to explain in case I start accidentally spreading some misinformation, but I got to give a little bit of it a go. So take this with a grain of salt and please don't use this as clinical advice. So essentially, we have a prehistoric brain and a more modern brain. The prehistoric is your amygdala, and that takes over whenever you become too stressed or at a heightened state. The other part of your brain, with all the fancy modern computing logical power and all that kind of stuff, so that goes offline when the amygdala goes online. So you lose all of that great logic and reasoning and ability to function as you do with your modern brain. So, which makes user testing an absolute nightmare. As you can probably guess, the intention gap between your prehistoric brain and your modern brain is going to show up in that user testing versus the user results on the other side. And we can never test users in the state of that amygdala without crossing ethical boundaries and landing in an episode of Black Mirror. So imagine trying to find something you need on the internet with your prehistoric caveman brain. It's not a lot of fun. That's because heightened senses can make colors, words, and buttons all jumble up. So we can mimic this on ourselves, which is a lot safer and more ethical to do, by doing things, not by just mentally distressing yourself, but you can do it by like physically actually increasing symptoms. So running, anything that'll get your heart running really helps as well. So those are kind of great ways to just give it a go. And especially if you're someone who's never experienced any mental distress, that can kind of actually help you understand some of those states too. Again, that's like just an exploratory experiment. That's not fully clinically what you do for mental well-being. It's for UX. So to keep people feeling safe and not entering the panic zone, we heavily leaned into design. For us, we used several design aesthetics. We picked calm colors and really easy to read text and compositions that had really like sort of simple layouts and kept one piece of information for one piece of information. And so these compositions just allow people to be able to process that information a little bit easier and hopefully generate a sense of calm. We quickly developed the lo-fi wireframe off the existing tools that Claire had to begin theming and placing these tools in a safe way and to start working on some more bespoke tools. So inside this wireframe, we have this virtual safe space by getting permission from the user to ask questions or to do that learning. So we get that permission by, I'll just show you some screens. So you can either look at my screen if it's pixelated. There is a QR code so you can go to this page yourself to see how we do it. And it's kind of simple. So I'll just show you. So essentially we had the tool here, and then we had that what is deep breathing, and then that essentially goes to the rest of the page, and it goes through a bunch of different instructions to make sure that the person feels really good and calm and aware of what it is that they're going to do. So you have the pictorial version, you have the bullet pointed numbered version, you have a video version, and you also have a struggling to do the exercise. And so this is a lot of that preempting of those behavioral and verbal cues that we can't read, of what happens if someone doesn't get it, which is, it totally happens. And how would you feel if you go to do some mental well-being exercise and it doesn't work? What you're going to say is, none of it works for me, I'm never doing it again. So we really want to make sure we are totally acknowledging that not every bit of mental well-being practices and tools and theories and stuff is going to work on each person. So really, really good, important step is to make sure that you have those kind of exit clauses for people to validate their experience if they don't get it or don't like it or it doesn't work for them. Cool. So the next challenge is one that I personally quite struggled with. It shook me to my foundations. Are the design practices we have in place at the moment the problem? Here we have the classic bell curve, which most design processes are based on. So, you know, you have the particular formula underneath it that's a decision-making tool based on consensus or essentially the number of votes. The issue with this is it silences the voices on the edges. So imagine this bell curve is your targeted audience, and you've gone through all the distinct and correct co-design or UX research and testing processes, and have something that's user-driven and fit for them. But have you? For us, delivering products for New Zealanders, it makes our bell curve more problematic. We need to balance a general audience experience with a targeted audience experience for a subject matter that's extremely personal. What processes, so what I want to ask you is, what processes in design can you think of where that consensus is done by the majority? And I'd love you to share it with everybody in the chat if you can, because it would be great for us to learn from each other how some of those processes potentially function, and for us to identify if it's the right thing for our products that we're working on. There's also another really fantastic book. I am going to warn you, I cried about reading the first case study. It is pretty heavy. It's called Automating Inequality, How High-Tech Tools Profile, Police and Punish the Poor. And I strongly urge anyone who is a product manager or defines KPIs for a product that is in the public space or as a utility, as it opens your eyes a lot to what can go wrong. And it's simply through a lot of the time not thinking about what you're including versus what you're excluding. So a lot of metrics only define one or the other. And you want to be really clear what the impact is on that other side. So if you say, I'm going to do this, what does that mean for not doing it? Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. Cool. So here's a snapshot of my favorite tool in the micro tool set. It's called Supporting Others. Here you can see the balance between generalist and individualist need through a simple branching process. My screen is super pixelated, so I'm not sure if you guys can read it or if your screen looks like mine. So if it doesn't, again, just go to the website and you can see it yourself, or you can just try and pretend that you can read pixelated screens. So because of the breadth and depth that we have, we need to make sure that our variable processes don't go too far. So because you're pixelated in high def, low def, would that work? So because of the breadth and depth versus time component, we couldn't drill more than this many options without it turning into an interrogation tool. So some of these variables actually took a really long time for content writers, subject matter experts, stakeholders, and everyone to review, because we wanted to make sure that they were equitable and inclusive for a lot of different audiences. The other side of that, though, is it gets vague very quickly and kind of useless. So there's a really hard line to when you kind of got to call it. And so at that point, you do have to accept that someone's not going to apply. So again, always make sure you have those options of this doesn't apply to me, this doesn't work for me, and validate that, which we did through the branching process. The other big design process we had to bypass was engagement metrics and return user metrics. When we are designing for mental well-being, we wanted to be careful not to create new reliances on apps or digital spaces, and instead focus on the application in person's life. This means instead of cyclic user experiences that ensure users keep coming back to the platform and staying on the platform for longer, we actually wanted to enable people to come, try a micro tool, but potentially never come back again. So how do you show success when engagement and user return isn't what's key? For us, we focused on many UX pathways through the micro tool wireframe. Measure the beginning and ending of each tool to understand, do people want this tool? Is it showing them enough value for them to even start it? And then are we seeing them finish the tool? So have they dropped off through that process? So we actually analyze it in a lot smaller kind of space. And one of the things is the starting is also not something that you want to push people through, because they may have come from advertising or from that passive state and may have identified for themselves at that moment is not the right time to do that tool. So you don't want to try and force them through it. You want to give them enough information to make the decision, and you need to be okay if your stats don't look super amazing because of it. Because who doesn't want to drive their stats up? So and as a Crown entity, to hitting a audit doesn't require commercial models for products, so we're able to not drive users back to the product or gain retention, which is why we get to focus on the initial engagements of people using these types of products and encouraging a good experience with it, so that it'll encourage them to try a different product, maybe that's bigger or more intensive, or sort of try a different service. So it's really that kind of first taster, that first step, the smallest step. So verbs are powerful. So for us, this one here, for me, is super important. This isn't a design challenge. This is actually a learning design challenge, and it's very much educational theory. It's kind of nothing sitting in UX, but Sophie was talking about it earlier today in her object-oriented talk about verbs, and this so links up with it. I'm so excited to have seen that. So verbs are super, super powerful, and we want to be really, really clear about what a verb means. When we think about learning, we're actually thinking about what's happening in the real world versus what's happening in the product. So we want to think about the outcomes and behaviors that we want to see in the real world. So we use learning outcomes for that. I so love that hooked book as well. We use these learning outcomes, and we want to really think about the verbs that we use. And so much like Sophie's talking about those verbs, we do that in the real world. Some learning verbs are really key ones is identify. And so that's about where you have, you're looking for something in your environment and finding it, right? And so when you say that, you then know that if you were to reverse engineer a learning outcome, which is essentially what you do, is you get your learning outcome and then you design, brief, reverse engineer it, is you then go, okay, how would I show people that identifying piece? That means you're going to need to show them lots of different environments with lots of different situations that are either yes or no, so that they can see that and can test it and try it themselves before they try and do it in the real world, and then help them with some of that translation over. On my screen is Bloom's taxonomy, which is an example of verbs used in learning outcomes. Bloom's taxonomy is pretty handy if you ever want to Google it for help with these verbs. I'll be super interested to see how these worked in the user object orientation as well. And one of our really awesome things is Ara Digital made us this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful dashboard, which again, if you're pixelated, it's probably not going to see it. I'm more than happy to try and share screens in the social lounge to show the whole thing. But essentially they created this really beautiful, simple flow that showed those entry points, exit points, what people liked and didn't like about the tools, so that we could continuously iterate it. which is where we're at now. The dashboard is great for us to help us fix things, and this is only the beginning of mental wellbeing tools for the public, and I'd love to hear from you what you think of the product and what you would do next. Also, bonus points for whoever finds all of the design debt that I have in the homepage from the various iterations that we've done already of bringing out from the first small amounts of tools to the 12 now. So that's me. And thank you so much for listening to me. If I have any time, which I don't think I do, answer questions.